Welcome, everyone, to a great episode of Theory of Change, where I talk to change makers through a capital lens or close to it. And today we have a very special guest that we're going to speak to, Ian Ross Smith. And Ian has a wild life story, and he's going to talk to us about rehabilitation, about substance addiction, and he will share with us how he set up his own company, Istana, as an ultra private rehabilitation model, let's say, how he's helping his clients, very high profile individuals, through their mental or physical health crises. It's super, super fascinating. I wish we had more time to go deeper into all the nuances. And it's super, super fascinating what Ian is sharing from a personal perspective about his life, his vulnerability, and then also how Istana is helping the clients. I think it's wonderful to see. We can all learn from it, whether we are going through a crisis or somebody else is going through a crisis. I want to do a quick shout out to Sean Lesser and the Real Mental Health Foundation. Please go and check them out at thereal.care. If you or someone is struggling with mental health, please find someone nearby, talk to someone. It doesn't always have to be therapy, but it might be. So go and find professional health. And sometimes you're just one conversation away from healing and from going on a path of healing. This episode is about the heart, it's about the mind, it's about community. And I wish you lots of joy and insight. And with that being said, let's go and talk to Ian.
I mean, as a starting point, I suppose the theory of change. The starting point is the end point of the story. It's our tagline is Rehabilitation Redefined. So we've redefined what we believe rehabilitation can be. That's the end point of the story. How it got to this point is a combination of my personal history, my family, my experience with substance dependence, attempting to manage a career at quite high levels, and substance dependence and substance abuse. That cratering, being disconnected from the family, and having to rebuild my life from humble beginnings. From great wealth, I ended up with nothing. And I can go into more depth about my family background if you want, because that's it in a nutshell. I was born in London in 1959. My father was 52 when he had me, so he was born in 1907. He was a very different generation to the one that he was about to meet in the 60s and 70s. My mother was, I think, a fair bit younger than him, and she was beautiful and glamorous. Our apartment in London, whenever I look at a movie or a TV series like Mad Men, it always reminds me of our apartment in London. It's that kind of decoration, those kind of colors, kind of feel. Yeah, it takes me back. And I went to Hill House. I was, a privileged upbringing. Dad was a distant figure. He was a self-made man. He was, again, had the madman vibe about him. He wore a fedora and a suit and tie and went to work every day, and then came home and smoked a cigar and a scotch and read the newspaper. And it was a very, it was like out of a movie, but there was a background noise which was not good, and that was my mother, and the constant arguing. And I knew I could pick up from very early age there's something wrong with my mother. Didn't know what it was. I couldn't articulate it. And they separated when I was, I think, about 7. Um, and I moved with my mother to a small house in Sussex and went to a boarding school from the age of 9. And Dad was he had a colourful history, but we had a way of communicating. He knew there was something wrong with my mother. I started picking it up when I opened the garden shed, and it was full of gin bottles. She was a chronic alcoholic, and there was no help for her really in those days. You had to really look hard to find people who understood and the help that she needed. From the outside, everybody just looked at the behavior, which was abysmal. And there was no questioning of what's really is underlying, what's behind this behavior. It got too much for me. The age of, I don't know, like 11 years old, I picked up the phone to Dad and I said, listen, this is it. You got to come and get me. And that was the last time I saw my mother. I came home from school at half term, and Dad said, let's go for a walk around the lake in his big house in Sussex. And he told me that my mother had died. And I don't think I even cried. I was so disassociated from, because I'd been caring for her since I was very young age, really. I was so disassociated that I don't know if I even really cried. And then he just sent me back to school when half term ended, and I didn't go to a funeral or anything. I didn't realize it at the time that was a significant turning point in my life. My personality changed, I think, or it started to change. I was a sportsman. I had good school grades. I went to Charterhouse, which is an English public school. But I had fundamentally changed as a human being. And Dad offered me a choice of schools to go to, and including La Rosée in Switzerland. But I chose Charterhouse because I saw some of the boys there had long hair. And, this was the trajectory I was on. And I soon discovered drugs, and a major scandal erupted where 12 people were expelled from Charterhouse, which is one of England's best known schools. At the same time, I wasn't, although I was one of the ringleaders. Dad was in MI6 and special operations executive during the war, and he taught me all these tricks as a kid, deny everything and all this kind of stuff. But they got me eventually, and they threw me out. And I'd lost all interest in academia by this stage, and I was on some kind of self-destruct path. I went to a local grammar school and then a college of further education, but really I spent all the time at the pub, and it was just a downward spiral really until I moved to London and discovered heroin. And from the moment the first time I took heroin, it was just the answer to all of my problems. I suddenly felt at peace with the world, and I really got it, and it got me in a major way. I still carried on with my career in advertising, and I started my first business when I was 19 in London, which could have been really successful, but we had huge clients, and But my substance dependence completely obliterated any chance of success with the business. And eventually, I had to pick up the phone to my father again, and who by this time completely hadn't seen for years maybe, and said, "I need help. I'm at the end of the road." He said, "Okay, come down to Sussex and we'll discuss what to do." And he said, "Well, I think you should go away." And I looked it up. There's an expression for Victorian families in the old days called remittance children, who are the black sheep of the family who were sent away to the colonies. I think I was the last of the remittance children. I was sent off to Australia, and it was a tough lesson, and it was probably it was a good choice, but it further ostracized me from the family. But I got my act together. I got clean, fit and healthy. I went to a public rehab and stayed there for a while. And was introduced to Narcotics Anonymous, the 12-step fellowship. And I still know people to this day from that rehab I went to in 1985. They're still some of my best friends, as are people from NA. And it was at that point that, and this is all leading up to Istana, that I was experienced the power of human connection. I was standing on my own, a little bit lost, at this very big NA meeting after going to rehab in Sydney, and there are a bunch of people standing next to me. One of them just turned around to me and said, "Hi, my name's Jim. We're going for dinner. Do you want to join us?" I said, "Yeah, sure." And that was just that small, tiny little gesture, that just one moment of being welcomed in and somewhere and included, set me on this path of recovery, which lasted for 8 years. And during that time, I put my life together in a very, very fantastic way. I started out with nothing, doing high-rise window cleaning, and ended up building a career and buying, the pels on my suits got bigger, and the watches got more gaudy, and the cars got more convertible, and my recovery was solid, and it was good. It was like everything I had, I owed to my recovery, because I put my recovery first. And that I'll never forget that moment of connection, and that just inviting somebody in. And I've always made a point of doing that. If I'm in a meeting, I see somebody standing on the road. And then I was offered a job in Singapore, and I moved away from that connection and community that I'd built around me. And the wheels fell off fairly badly. By this stage, I was working in the upper echelons of advertising. I started drinking. I'd never had a problem with alcohol, but I was an addict, and it became a problem. And after about 3 or 4 years, it just blew up, and I moved to Bali, of all places, to retire, because I saved a lot of money and inherited a little bit of money. My father had died by this stage, and I moved to Bali and spent 4 years partying, and literally 4 years, running non-stop. It was the youth I never had, because heroin sits a very nice blanket, which is warm to draw over you, takes away the rest of your life. And I never really had a youth, because I was taking heroin from the age of 17 or 18 till 25. So in my 30s, I was living like a teenager in Singapore and Bali. really, kind of doing things that 20-year-olds do. But that ended in tears, and I ended up back at the rehab I'd been to, God knows how long ago, in the 80s. And I had to, I arrived back at the rehab with a suitcase and a silver briefcase with nothing in it but a cigar for some reason. I don't know why, but the residents of the rehab kind of looked at me and thought, right, okay, who the hell's this walking in the door? And it was, I had to. It was a bumpy road. It took me a long time because heroin's easy to get off. It's an unpleasant detox, but once you're off it, your life becomes very shiny and sparkly. Whereas alcohol is a much more insidious drug. And I associated alcohol and party drugs with the good times. Heroin I associated with bad times. So it was a real struggle for me. And it took me years and years and years of going in and out of rehabs, and 6 months here and a year there to get back. And again, it was just a moment of connection. I was in a clinic in Queensland, and I met a friend of mine from Byron Bay who had also had a significant amount of time clean. I said, what are you doing after this? And he said, well, I'm going back to Byron. I said, so am I. And he said, well, let's just hang together. And he said, are you working? I said, no, I lost my business. I had to sell my house and everything. He said, well, why don't we just do meetings? And I went, yes, sounds like a plan. There's nothing else to do. So I did I'm not advocating the 12-step fellowships. This is just how it happened for me. But it's more about connection and the dogma that lies within the fellowships. And I just went into this recovery phase of rebuilding my life again. And I got very fit, very healthy. I didn't have any money. I was living in a shared house in Byron Bay. And by this stage, I was in my late 40s. And I was working for a company. A friend of mine had started a company. He had this idea while he was walking along the beach. He was also in recovery, of inverting the standard rehab concept completely. So instead of having a group of people, clients, and a small team of whatever you want, support workers and psychotherapists, you'd have one client and a large team of psychotherapists who are completely devoted to that client. So he inverted that model and made it completely bespoke. And he had this art of hiring really good people. And he assembled this incredible team around him. This business became unbelievably successful. It was the only one of its kind. It was pioneered the entire one-on-one model. And I worked for him. I wrote their websites. I was initially marketing, and I also worked as a support worker. So I saw both sides of the business intimately. Support workers are people who's just there as companions, butlers, drivers, and you're at the bottom of the food chain, but you spend the most amount of time with the client. And it was just fabulous. It was the team, everybody worked for the company, we really enjoyed each other's company. We took pride in what we did. We put everything we had into working with the clients, and it was just a really great experience. But one day we received a text, and Michael had sold the business, and it changed in a way that was, you couldn't really put your finger on how it changed, because what changed was with the new ownership was not the fundamentals, but the intangibles, and the compassion and the connection and the humor and the laughter. And I remember I was looking after this really lovely man in this big house on the beach in Byron Bay. And he was sitting at this big dining table on his own, and there was me and the chef. And I just looked at him, and he was looking at a pretty empty schedule, and he didn't look happy. And I just felt really sorry for this guy. He'd paid a lot of money, because bespoke service such as that is expensive. And I understood then what had been stripped out of the business, and it was the thing that made it special. For want of a better word, it was the love. It became just a business, and I hung in for a few more weeks and then resigned. And I didn't have the idea for Istana immediately after that, but it came to me gradually, almost serendipitously. I was having conversations with people around the world, and I knew that I could replicate the original business with the love and make it even better, and locate it in more accessible points of the globe than just Byron Bay, Australia, which is a hike for somebody from London or anywhere, really. Anywhere. It takes a while to get to the east coast of Australia. And I didn't know if it was going to work. And so I got some finance. We put up a website. I wrote the website. It was quite nice. And one day the phone rang, and it was a woman who said she wants to send her brother to us in Bali, which was our first location that we opened. And she said, "How much did you charge?" And I was so flabbergasted that I'd actually got a phone call. I completely fluffed my lines and undercharged massively, and then had to jump on a plane and make sure that everything was right at the other end for the client's arrival. And it was our first clients. There was a lot of scrambling around, but I had deep, deep institutional knowledge from this business that I'd worked at for 4 or 5 years beforehand of how things should work. So I was able to impart that to people really quickly, train them, but still mistakes are made. But minor ones, not major ones. And the outcome of that first client remains to this day. He's still in touch with us, and that's over 8 years ago now. And we got off to a Le Mans start. It was one client after another, and the team built, and we recognized what our strengths were and how we had to differentiate ourselves from the various other places that had opened over the intervening years between when the first place opened. The Swiss had got into it. There's a lot of people who say they do what we do, but really there's only a handful in the world that really do it. We didn't position ourselves towards the ultra high net worth individuals, but because of the nature of what we were doing and the emphasis that we placed on the bespoke approach, entirely bespoke, and the confidentiality and the locations and the villas, it rapidly became apparent that these were our clients. And we had to learn very, very quickly the complexities, the nuances of working with this category of people. And our hiring became very different. We had to lift everything to the level of immaculate and flawless very quickly, because the clients who were coming through the door, their expectations were high. But we did it. Over a period of about a year, we got to where we should have been. And now, I guess our mission, the mission is to help people who pick up the phone. And to do that, you have to make the prospect of coming into treatment attractive. Most people perceive it as being a torrid affair, something to be dreaded or feared. And we make it, we want to make Istana somewhere that you dreamt about going to, somewhere that was so different and so beautiful and so where you felt held, but you could still operate, and where you could still communicate, but you could still get well. And to do that, it has to be entirely bespoke, from the minutest detail to curating the right teams, to choosing the right the residences, the villas. Everything is bespoke. When the client walks through the door of a villa, whatever location, they've got off a long flight quite often, because our clients fly from all over the world to come to us. They're walking through the doors and into a world that's been created just for them. It's an Alice through the looking glass. Client described it as an Alice through the looking glass effect. And the teams that we have, I love them so much. They are just endlessly compassionate, endlessly good at what they do, and they make everything look easy, even though it is incredibly hard what we do. And I just love it. And I love, every client is different. This is the other thing about a bespoke business. Every client is different. So Istana doesn't really exist in normal space and time. It's created de novo for each and every client, which is an extraordinary concept. If you stop to think about it, that we create a treating team, a support team, the chefs, the drivers, the clinical team, the accommodation, everything, their diet is created just for that individual. And the other thing that we believe, apart from all the bespoke, and those are kind of the logistics, but the real thing goes back to my personal experiences that I mentioned earlier about connection when I was invited in. And at the levels that we operate, clinical excellence it should just be a given. And the resources that you draw on in the clinical realm should be almost unlimited and available to the client's needs. That's just a given. What is not a given is the human touch, because the client, unless they connect with the team around them, everybody from the chef to the driver to the support workers to the yoga teachers, the breath work, the Watsu, the psychotherapists, the nurses, the doctors, the psychologists, unless they connect with all these people on a human level, then they're going to remain closed and progress stalls. So we place as much emphasis on the human touch and how the clinical excellence is delivered as the clinical excellence itself. And that, I think, is probably the story of Istana and how I'm trying to enact change in the world. This is one more thing I'd like to say. It's that we do, we do, we are expensive and we are exclusive and we have a niche clientele, but maybe 80% of the calls that I receive are people that can't afford us. And we bend over backwards to either help them ourselves, and we've done this several times in the past, calling on favors from friends who own villas and just done, and or we will refer them to trusted places around the world. We never ever leave anybody hanging. So if somebody contacts us, we'll stay in touch until they're either in our hands or we know that they're safely placed.
I I've been attentively listening, and I want to acknowledge what you said. In our previous conversations, you mentioned a few examples of stories, and I would like you to maybe give us a little bit of color of what it could look like if I wanted to pick up the phone, be that for myself or for somebody else. If you could share the top of your mind, an illustrative experience. So I think many of the listeners may be in touch with such a concept for the first time. They may
Mm,
not be in touch with the symptoms of substance abuse, stress, pressure in the career, family, all these things. But a solution that caters to that might be novel as an idea. And maybe I would always argue that narratives and stories, just like community, it's community and stories that weave the tapestry of the human condition.
yeah, I couldn't agree with you more. I can give you a couple of examples. I don't know how much time we've got. Um, I can give you I'll give you three examples. The first one would be an example of rapid response, I suppose. It's a very brief, quick story. We received a phone call from one of our locations of a client who was in the wife of a client who was in distress. They're exceptionally high profile people. They had a villa on that island, and the wife said, "We don't need anything other than we don't need any of the complementary therapies. This is crisis management, and it's reputational crisis management. We just need the clinical team here and a psychotherapist for as long as we're here, which is another 2 weeks." And we had a doctor and a nursing team there within an hour. We flew in, the psychologist flew in from Miami, and psychiatrist was the head of psychiatry on the island. And the client was exceptionally happy with this service. It's not something that we can do every time. We cannot respond within an hour every time. But if they just need that level of service really quickly, we're there for them. We can do that. Another example was a client who was referred to us by I guess they were some kind of sober companion company or something, a European company. And they gave us what we believed to be a comprehensive brief, but it was really scant. It turned out that we were told it was substance dependence. And the client arrived after a long trip to Bali, and we rapidly realized that silent alcohol dependence was just one of his problems. He was he had a whole alphabet soup of behavioral health disorders, including extreme autism, and he stayed with us for 2 months. We had to respond rapidly to this. We had to respond to this guy was a genius. He could do 8-digit by 8-digit multiplications in his head in under 2 minutes just for fun. So we had to respond to that level of intelligence. And you'd say something, but because of the behavioral health conditions, you wouldn't necessarily acknowledge it. So you'd repeat it and he'd get angry. So we had to adapt to this thing incredibly quickly, this way of communicating very quickly to gain his trust and for him to come on side with us. He stayed with us for 2 months, and he was a lovely, lovely man, just a really, really nice guy. But despite the fact that he was a genius and exceptionally talented and a very successful man, he couldn't really manage his personal life. He wants to try it going it on his own. So he went we sent somebody kind of discreetly in the background with him, but he went off to the northern side of Bali on his own for a week. And he came back, he said, listen, that didn't work for me. That was really, really hard and tough. I got to get back to my home. I would like to take a small team with me, and I need your help to really kind of curate my lifestyle, help me build my life. So he sent a team back with him to his home country, who, first of all, the psychologist flew back a week before he left and flew around near to his hometown and interviewed about 10 other psychologists to find the right one for this incredibly complex person. And we found the right guy, woman actually, sorry. And then the client arrived with the support team, and our psychologist flew back after handing him over to the psychologist in the country. And we hired a PA. I called a friend of mine in London who specialized in VIP recruitment. I said, but he's this kind of guy. And she said, no problem. My ex-boyfriend was that kind of guy. So we found it. She recruited a PA in his home country, which was perfect for him, who understood him, but also understood the business and what needed to be done. We also hired a chef, a housekeeper, interior decorator, and helped him rebuild his life and did as much as we possibly could. And we were with him for about 4 months and still in touch with him now. But that was a really intense and hugely complex client experience where we had to respond to completely unexpected circumstances very, very quickly. And the third story is one that your clients your listeners might how more easy to relate to, because it's to do with dynamics within high profile and high net worth families. The daughter of a political family was referred to us for substance abuse, and we were grilled heavily by the family, um, uh, and probably very intensive background checks were done on us. They're a ruling family of an entire country, so they would have had the wherewithal. And one of the things that the the child of the family didn't like was the constant presence of bodyguards. So we had to hire 3 villas because we wanted to have the clients separately. The aunties and the mother had another villa, and then there was a team of bodyguards in another villa. So we had to just it was a logistical, like, acrobatics that we went through, because whenever the client left for the villa, we had to notify the security team. They'd all send their WhatsApp through, and they'd follow along behind on scooters and shorts and t-shirts. But they were all armed, and that was just the logistics. But the really, really hard part was that actually there was no substance dependence problem with this client. This client was a creative spirit within a family that was dynastic and had very specific expectations of its family members, and she just didn't fit the mold. An artist, hugely creative, self-expressive, and we had to find a way of communicating, because in reality, 90% of our clients, substance dependence in particular, not so much with behavioral health, comes back to family trauma. And we had to find a way to communicate to the family who their child was without betraying the child's confidence and jeopardizing her trust in us. That in itself was a masterpiece by our psychologist, who managed to walk that incredibly thin tightrope of explaining to this immensely powerful and complex family that this is who your child is, and this is what the problem is. It's not what you thought it was. It is just a creative spirit. It's like a caged bird, and that was a immensely complex, multifaceted, but incredibly rewarding client for everybody involved. The clients were happy, the family was happy, the team were just overjoyed that they'd managed to pull off this extraordinary feat of complexity in such a flawless fashion. And I was just so proud of them all. They just did such a good job. It was remarkable. So those are 3 stories I think that are reasonable case studies for what we do, how bespoke we are, and how agile we are. And you have to be nimble to be able to respond to situations like that.
Hi, I hope you enjoyed this conversation so far. Isn't it amazing how Ian's dad helped him and came down? And it shows this connection was really important for Ian at the time. And I want to give a quick shout out to David Clark, who helps busy parents, CEOs, ultra high net worth individuals traveling the world and through private aviation, allowing them 30 to 40 more nights per year at home with their children through private aviation. David is helping me in creating this podcast, and he's part of the community. And I want him to help as many families as he can, giving them more time back with their children, whether we're talking multi-generational wealth, whether we're talking about family dynamics, whether we're talking about next generation empowerment, whether your children are just, in their earliest stages of life, or whether you want to be there for their rehearsal. David makes it possible for you to quickly travel from one place to the other. So go and check him out. I will leave his contact details and his LinkedIn in the show notes, and then we'll jump back into the episode with Ian. I think it's really beautiful, and I would like to leave it at that. I would like to ask one follow-up question from sort of a broader societal perspective. I'm curious about your view, and that is in contrast to the bespoke and very expensive, because of the bespokeness, the very expensive treatment. Think of society at large, whether that is the developed economies, maybe emerging markets. I don't want to cite numbers and statistics on the prevalence of substance abuse, family trauma, behavioral dysfunctions, but in general, the suffering on this level and the magnitude and the current solutions. And you mentioned a few things that actually doesn't cost anything, like an invitation to extend to someone to join a dinner. I mean, it's depending on where you go for dinner, it's not a costly expense to, I don't want to say to alleviate suffering, but to bring healing and to bring health and repairment. And we were just, prior to our call, I was sharing with you a personal situation within my family, within my close relationships. And as I'm listening to you and this situation continues, I'm like, okay, I have some ideas of what I can do to share time and give connectivity. So we talked about the Real Mental Health Foundation, of which I'm inviting you to become an ambassador as well. What are and if I may, so like we are both work in progress. We can talk about these things from experience, but we're not claiming that we have solved it all, and it's not that we're not challenged every now and then, or maybe daily, right? And such is our experience. I'm keen.
You sound far more advanced than me, Benjamin.
I agree. I see a lot of people and I'm like, wow, I would love to just, take a bite out of your recipe and if I would just be able to, show 10% of what you're capable of. But I think it is a way as human creatures that we are modeling ourselves. And if we can just pick these role models, I certainly, talking about my role as a father a few years ago, because my marriage was quite awful, and the results of that are in a way quite awful. And so I tried to repair, I tried to amend, I tried to learn, and so I made it a deliberate function of my life to look for fathers of whom I think they are good examples. Oh, that's maybe how you can handle your emotions, your thoughts, and be active with your children. So I'm quite curious. I'm going to see them in March for 2 weeks, my daughters, and I'm super, super excited and nervous and anxious and happy to see what have changed. How can I maybe implement things a little bit differently and get them on a different trajectory? in honor also of your story that you've shared with us so generously and so kindly, I would like to say. So, closing my remarks and uh, 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 giving you the time to speak again. What are some low hanging fruits where that you see beyond the ultra high net worth luxury rehabilitation that only pertains to a few in this world? What about what about what are the things you see all of us can do?
Oh man, such a huge question. But I look at for instance, the Balinese culture, despite the fact that Ireland is under siege from development and tourism, is fully intact. Their villages, their families, the way they look after each other is is a lesson to us all. They don't send their they they build their houses in such a way that they're designed to expand to accommodate new family members. Um, and the villages are designed to be an extension of everybody's family. Um, and I honestly, I think that the 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 lessons to be learned are in communities like that for things that we've lost. You know, there used to be such a thing called village life in England. I don't know if it still exists. I hope it does. Where you knew everybody, you knew the postman, you knew the guy who delivered the milk, you knew the names of the people in the post office, and it was a community, and everyone looked out for each other. Um, and the last time I really felt that sense of community was when living in Asia in the 90s as an expat. And I was in Indonesia during the revolution. There was a revolution in 97. It was fairly short lived, but it was still something. The expat community just came together. But we still, that was just a highlight, but we all looked after each other. There's something about community. There's something about social media and telephones and devices that act as disconnects as opposed to connect. They were supposed to connect people, but they've disconnected people. They've become megaphones as opposed to a dialogue, you know. And I think it's doing what you're doing. It's things like the community that you're building with the mental health. But it's not just looking for people who are distressed. It's inviting. It's somehow creating community wherever you are. And I don't know. It's a huge question because the whole world has been upended by technology and macro events, and technology is really at the heart, I think, of most macro events that have happened. I think technology created some of the world leaders that are causing problems in the world today because they wouldn't have had that platform otherwise. So I don't think there's any solution. We've just got to figure out a way of being happy and creating communities and somehow spreading the love.
You know, I thought it
One
was.
of my favorite musicians is Michael Spearhead was his band. Um, and he just, all of his songs were about love and community and feel the love, spread the love. But they were really good songs as well. Michael Franti.
Thank you.
Um, yeah. I don't know. It doesn't answer your question, Benjamin, but I think that's where it's at, and is to find some kind of belonging. And if you see somebody who looks as though they don't belong, invite them in.
I went to the gym the other day, and it's in a very lively street, a shopping street, and there was a person sitting on the ground, with the hats, collecting money, truly begging, you know. I noticed these people. I know the regular ones in our city, but he was fresh. I never saw his face before. And something struck me about him, and I went back to the shop and I bought I bought him toothpaste and a toothbrush. I bought him spaghetti and tomato sauce and some cheese and some proteins and everything, and eggs, speculating that he would have a place where with a kitchen and he would be able to cook himself a very simple meal. And I kneeled down. I came very slowly up to him, didn't want to scare him, uh, and I placed the bag, and his eyes lit up. You could sort of feel through all the layers of history and trauma and experiences,
Mm.
and get a sense of the genius that resides within that mind. And he was so happy. He was thanking. He didn't say a lot, and uh, and then I left to go to the gym. And as I entered the gym, I would just look back because I was very curious. And he was all over the place, looking inside the bag. What did I find? And I left these little pieces, like a toothbrush, that maybe if he would, because it's important. The teeth are important, and maybe he would have that connection with me and the tube for a few weeks, and maybe that
Mm.
could set him off onto whatever it is. We just never know. So creating community is something I strive to do here in my town. And it's so good what you're reminding us, that every time we come into a room, we can just do a quick scan of where is the community breaking off, and then maybe how can we build a bridge, how can we reconnect everyone to the community. And I think that's something every one of us is able and capable of. So that's a beautiful thought. And I would like to, on my end, close the
All
conversation
right. It's
with
been a
that.
pleasure.
It's been an absolute pleasure. Thank you so much, Ian.
Thank you, Benjamin. Absolute honor. We shall speak soon.